Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Country Soul Songbook Summit, fourth year annual. We're still going. Um, I'm so excited to introduce Charles L. Hughes. He will introduce his guest, who doesn't need an introduction, but it's just fun. It's just fun to build anticipation. Um, but Charles is really Charles, you're really one of the main reasons that that Country Soul Songbook even exists. Your book, Country Soul, um, was kind of the inciting incident in my head, to make me just realize like the complexity of the genres that we've that both I and your guest have chosen to call home. And it's always so great to have you back, um, talking to people that you're interested in. And the thing I love the most about Charles, everybody in CSSB world, is that he's just so invested and still interested in like what musicians and artists do in the culture. As a scholar, like that's where he has his radar always. And so I just appreciate you so much, Charles, and love being in community with you. So take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Kamar. That is such an honor to be considered in your company, and this is one of my favorite things every year, and I'm just so thrilled and so grateful to you and Kim and everyone for putting this together every year. This is just like the most amazing thing. Such a testament, I think, to all the great work that everybody involved is doing, but also how that work then can kind of be collectivized and built into something that can create some additional magic. So I'm really grateful and appreciative, and I mean, I'm always honored to be here. Always grateful to be a part of these conversations. But I am especially honored and grateful this year to have Candia Crazy Horse as my guest and conversation partner. Someone whose work as a writer and as a musician is not only so important to me and to many others in terms of how we think about and how we feel and how we understand these things, but also someone who continues to kind of expand, I think, and reimagine the kind of way in which the connections and the communities and the work that's being done here through the summit, the way that might look and appear. So I'm so grateful that she is with us today. I will forego too long an introduction for for one, because we'll talk about a lot of her great work today, but also just because if I tried to list off her accomplishments and all the amazing things she's done in her career so far, we'd only have like a couple minutes to talk. So I'm not going to do that. But the short version is that Candia Crazy Horse is a writer, an artist, indigenous and black artist living based in Lenapehoking. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. The
Close enough.
the historic homeland of the Lenapehoking. By the way, I'm coming from Memphis, the historic homeland of the Chickasaw and Choctaw, um, who has released acclaimed music that we'll talk about, is also someone who has written just some really important things, foundational work as a critic and a historian that is so many of us, and I definitely include myself here, are building on and trying to respond to. Her work is work that I cite and I mention all the time as being such an important part of the conversation that is continuing to flourish. And like I said, there are many of us who look to her as such a, I don't want to say foundational influence because it makes it seem like your career's over, which it's not, but it's someone who is such an important voice thinking about these things and helping understand them. And she's also now of course, an acclaimed musician with some music and some performances and some networks of communities that she is nurturing as well. She is someone who is currently working and on new projects that we'll talk about, and is someone who is again in so many ways and in different forms through parts of her work and career, and the communities that she builds. Um, this is someone who really embodies and I think helps to define this larger project, not only of thinking about marginalized voices, but thinking about re-understanding the past, present, and future of this music and the cultures and communities it represents. So I'm thrilled to be here with my brilliant friend and colleague, who I have not seen in any form. I guess we're zooming, but I have not seen in several years. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Yes, I'm thrilled to be here, especially with you and Sister Kamara. And it's great that we're in the 4th year of this event. Hope it goes on strong for all the time to come. And yeah, I miss you, so it's good to have at least this virtual connection today.
Yeah, we'll have to do IRL soon for sure. Um, so I wanted to just start, this is something I always love to ask folks, really of anybody, but particularly people who kind of do such important kind of creative and intellectual work and political work and other things, the work that you've done. I always like to ask kind of how you've gotten here, right? And you can take that in whatever way you'd like. How have you come to do the work that you're doing? What's your journey? And again, interpret that in whatever way you'd like.
Okay, well, I had a real hard time deciding what I was going to be when I grew up. The closest I came was a desire and habit to paint in middle school. And that was at the Lycée Rochambeau with my art teacher, Mylène Fallou, who really encouraged me. After growing up in and out of Africa, I moved to New York City to attend the School of Visual Arts. I didn't major in painting, I majored in film. That's a whole other story. Then I spent most of the 1990s working at 3 different agencies of the United Nations. And while I was there, I was also in my spare time following my then favorite band, the Black Crowes, around the country and contributing to their original website. And there were other fans of theirs online who kept saying that I should write professionally about music. Before that hadn't occurred to me. So I found out about an internship at the Village Voice in the music section. I applied with a piece on Graham Parsons and it got accepted. So that was the point at which my life became centered around music. I mostly covered Southern rock and roots music and country and folk. I gained new colleagues in Rock Crit and got to know lots of musicians and the people who work for them. One of these musicians is my dear friend Jennifer Harima of Royal Trucks and Black Bananas. I was visiting Jennifer in California at a certain point, and we were driving, I think, to Long Beach, and I got in her car with a Buffalo Springfield CD that was in her garage, and I was singing along to it as we were moving. And suddenly she turned to me and suggested I should write her a song. So that song became the original version of my first single, California, which was named after her cat. That's an unknown fact. Although I didn't come from a musical family, suddenly I was a songwriter. So that's really how it all began.
Wow. Yeah, that's it's so interesting how these paths can come together and come up, send us in new directions. So as both as a writer and a musician, or just as a person, human being, uh, who were who were your main influences? Like, who are those folks who either, again, musically or in terms of writing or educating, acting, what all of the things you do or whatever, just who were important influences on your work, and maybe still, right? But who are the kind of folks that you find to be really influential in all the things that you've done and continue to do?
Well, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, is my favorite author. I was not influenced by anybody in rock criticism when I began. But I came to know Alan Willis and my honorary uncle Stanley Booth, whose work I greatly admired. I also gained a great respect for Amy Linden and Holly George Warren. And my favorite editor at The Voice was probably Chuck Eddy. So a lot of people to learn from. When it comes to music, I was most influenced to become a singer and a songwriter by two indigenous iconic artists, Gene Clark and Purafe. Gene Clark with the Byrds and the Gene Clark Group, and Dillard and Clark and his solo work all made a heavy impression on me. I first became aware of Purafe with the rise of her group Eulali and the ensuing movement that happened in Indian country as a result. I revere Purafe, and I've incorporated her song Sacred Seed into my set list earlier this winter. She very beautifully creates songs that combine indigenous traditions with roots music forms from the south of Turtle Island, which is something I also try to do.
With Gene Clark, were there particular songs or albums that stuck out, or was it just kind of because his work is so amazing and I think still so underappreciated in some ways. Are there any particular songs or albums that stuck out to you or stick out to you from Gene Clark?
I think I first was very preoccupied with White Light. 1 in 100 is this song that just galvanizes me whenever I hear it. Of course, I love his masterpiece, No Other, because it's a place where the soul enters into the mix of the California sound. And as a Afro-Indigenous artist, I can appreciate that part being folded in.
Absolutely. Well, that's actually kind of a good segue to to talking about your album Stampede, which is, I think when it was released, I think a lot of us who heard it just immediately recognized so many key influences and key sounds that you were working with, and that you weren't presenting in a sort of like retro, let's go through all the old stuff, right? But it was such an exciting mixture and a kind of way to think about the music of the past in this very kind of fresh and new context. And, one of the things that is so present there that you've already kind of mentioned, from the Buffalo Springfield reference in the title of Stampede, or at least that's how I always interpreted it, right? As their
It
lost
is.
album. To the Eagles cover that's on it, to these kind of larger sort of, Laurel Canyon, LA musical influences. I mean, it's so centers California and the West, and maybe the mythical West. I don't know, maybe in quotes too. It's kind of got that. It's so deeply in this mix, even as it's also drawing from, the kind of southeastern side of the country and R&B and indigenous kind of world and traditions. So, as someone I know we've talked about before, like as someone who's thought so much about that, particularly that California or that California place in this larger story, like why has that music been so important to how you think about not only music that you've talked about and written about, but also the music you make? Like, what is it about that those California sounds that has been so influential to you?
Well, when I was a little girl in the early 70s, our house was full of jazz and soul and African music. There were no white artists in the mix at all. But when I would go to some of our movement neighbors' flats and look at their vinyl collection, which is what I always did when I first went to somebody else's house, the one record by a white group that I would find was Crosby, Stills and Nash's debut album. And from my acquaintance Henry Diltz's cover photo to the resounding harmonies, I was just became enthralled by the trio's music. And it was beamed into me from some foreign place that I just didn't know. I can't express really what it did to me. But I would find that magic in other contemporary Californian acts like Little Feat and also the Canadian Proto-Americana band, the band. uh, the California sound just opened this space in my heart and mind that was unknown and spawned a vision to me of what it would be like to live and create in Laurel Canyon and Topanga Canyon, which I never got over. When I was 14 in Springfield, Massachusetts, I found Buffalo Springfield Again, the album, at the vintage record store in town. And I was just blown away. That interchange between Stephen Stills and Neil Young was out of sight, as we used to say. It opened a whole new world to me of other artists and sound like Gene Clark and Wendy Waldman and others. And that love just continued over all the ensuing years until it came time to record my debut album. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, and the mostly Cuban team I was working with didn't get my references. But once California was written, the rest followed. And all the way through Stampede's closer, Quartz Hill, which contains guitar parts reflecting Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young's styles. And as a start, I have been photographed by Henry Diltz, and I still dream of living in Laurel Canyon, getting kind of up there, but you never know. Some windfall may come and allow me to buy up on top of the hill, up from the canyon store. So that, I don't know, just those artists, something magical about what they blended got to me, and it's never let me go.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe we'll get one of your songs on Stranger Things or something. You can get some of that, like that Kate Bush windfall or something.
Oh.
Get your Laurel Canyon house. That could be the goal for the next
Yeah, why not?
exactly. So, Stampede is such a wonderful record. I'm sure a lot of the people who'll be listening have heard it, but if you haven't, you really should go check it out. And you have now kind of, for the past few years and right now, kind of been working with this new project, Cactus Rose. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how Cactus Rose came to be. What was it that brought you and these musicians together in this new ensemble?
Well, I worked with members of Shakira's band on my 2 album projects thus far, including her keyboardist and musical director, Albert Menendez, who co-produced my albums in Miami. Then back in New York, I originally had a band called the Spirit of 76, which came undone when the drummer wanted to work on other projects, and the banjo player departed, and the guitarist moved back home. So somewhere after that, I was referred to the guitarist Jeff McLaughlin, and Cactus Rose was born. When it came time to curate the Sacred Water Medicine show in Soho, we were joined by the other guitarist, Lonnie Harrington, who is Seminole and Shawnee, and he joined in with us. And this winter, he officially became a part of the group. The name Cactus Rose came from my twin sister, Kamara, the other Kamara. I don't recall the specifics now, but it has to do with a descriptor of early 1970s hippie style in fashion.
Excellent. So, um, this new project that you're working on now with Cactus Rose, it just seems so important and interesting, especially in terms of how you're kind of connecting it to a couple very particular, specific historical stories and legacies. And I was just wondering, especially because you're in the process, I believe, right, of still gathering support for this really important work, and tell us about this new project and kind of what this new recording that you've been doing is all about.
Well, my 3rd album project, which is the working title of Cosmic Americana, is focused on songs about indigenous and Afro-Indigenous women from the 19th century to the 21st century. Central to this song cycle is the lore of the removal of the Cherokee from their Georgia homelands, which was occasioned by the original gold rush in America. This is contained in a song called Dahlonega, entre parenthèses, the gold rush. Sorry, I don't know how to say that in English. That happens to me. Ballad of Cactus Rose, another song, is about a native soiled dove who escapes from the saloon to the west. Quilt Rock Motherlode is about a rural-born Afro-Indigenous woman who experiences a fall once she moves up south to Pennsylvania. And Tipton Bramble, which is a lone song about an Indigenous man, is about Gene Clark. I really hope to get granted the funds in order to record this during 2024 because it's a subject that I think is right in its time to get out there.
Absolutely. And is so in conversation or kind of in community with a lot of other projects that are very much thinking through these histories musically, but also trying to do so in a way that is as vibrant and as exciting as I know this will certainly be. So as I think it's probably evident already to anybody who is here who wasn't necessarily familiar with your work, you also come from a tradition of educators and activists. That is part of sort of the way in which I know that you have thought about your own work and sort of the folks who are around you. And of course, it feels appropriate to pay tribute to Dory Ladner, who just passed away, such an important member of SNCC and of other organizations who I know that you were close to. So I was just wondering if you talk about this, because I think part of what the work we seem to do here through the summit and through these larger conversations is very much grounded in that kind of activist educational tradition. So I was just wondering kind of where, how you see yourself in those legacies or in those kind of continuums in that way, or if you do, maybe you don't, but I was just kind of wondering about that.
Well, I try to live and act on the right side of history and be true to my dual heritage. But I don't think I've accomplished very much on that score. It was my parents who ran with revolutionaries. They were with the Black Panthers in Algiers in August 1969. That's why they missed Woodstock. So they applied their Pan-African values to their existence and struggle from Dar es Salaam to Georgia. I grew up among their circle of friends who came from different spaces in the civil rights movement, including SNCC. Among them, sisters and brothers like the late Greg Tate's parents, Charles and Florence, and our Adams Morgan neighbor, Judy Richardson, and yes, Miss Dory Ladner, who walked on to the ancestors on Monday. I also benefited from my parents' collections of Black books and albums. I learned a lot from those resources. All this has had a profound influence on me and shaped life decisions I've made, but I still feel I've yet to fully make a representation for this lineage in my generation. At least my father thinks we haven't done enough to continue their struggle. So I hope my music at some point will have the impact on people across the world that the Black arts movement had on me.
Yeah. Well, and the way in which, one of the things that you've done in your own work and that you obviously continue to do is that I think is certainly a part of those traditions or a part of that that work is the way in which, as people have certainly heard in this conversation, how long you have championed the centrality of Native, Indigenous, First Nations musicians and artists as well as communities within our understanding of American music, obviously American history, etc., and the overlaps between them. You know, one of the things that has always really resonated with me and struck me is how much, you know, like earlier when you were talking about Gene Clark and Pura Fé, right? How much you're kind of have done to sort of insist that we understand the presence and the importance of that part of the tradition. And you yourself have done a lot in your own work, right? From the Sacred Water Medicine Show, that which you have performed in various places, to you work with powwows, to work with other organizations and beyond. So beyond, I mean, I'd love to hear more about kind of how you approach that, but also I wonder your thoughts on how we as listeners, as musicians, as writers, as fans, as people who care about trying to live in a more just world and tell a better version of the stories, um, how can we better honor those traditions? And how can we better honor the kind of contemporary manifestations of the way in which Native and Indigenous musicians, but also communities, have been so central and remain so central to how we think about things?
Well, I remain always inspired by Pura Fé, and I stand for the land, I stand for the people, and for the next 7 generations. I also ask Creator and the ancestors to guide my heart and words. Some things that could be done is to keep the songs by Indigenous artists that are not sacred in rotation. Cover Indigenous artists in your performances. Support them by attending more of their shows and, of course, buying merch to help them out. And try to learn more about the Native traditions and histories in order to write articles about their recordings that and shows that reflect a deeper knowledge.
Hmm. Absolutely. Um, so speaking of sort of the way in which we think about music and history and how they speak to each other or maybe don't, um, you know, on Stampede, back to that wonderful album, you have a song called Americana. You have described your own music as Native Americana. And among other things, many other things, Americana is, of course, a very recognizable, complicated term when it comes to thinking about the music, either the music called Americana or kind of how we understand that to be. So, especially because you're someone who has long been such a kind of brilliant kind of you have long so brilliantly talked about these ideas and these categories, including to kind of, you know, disrupt them or whatever. uh how do you define Americana in terms of thinking about this? And also, how do you what do you think about this genre of Americana music that is in some way a new version of a very old idea, but it also is such a thing we all talk about and that many make, or many kind of are part of the conversation. But just like, yeah, I'm really interested on some level. Just what do you think of this idea of Americana, and what do you think maybe it should be, or how we can better think about it?
Well, I'm afraid I have a dim view of the term Americana. I don't like to say, but I think it's a lazy term to group together sounds that emanated from the Southeast, which artists mixed together, and also a description for artists that are too traditional to be classified as mainstream country. As the term has developed, I think it's become a place to lump older artists who may have had country, pop, and folk success in their earlier career, but now are deemed to be too old to be supported. Um, but it's also the only viable description for my sound, which blends cosmic American music and Appalachian folk and country and roots forms. Uh, it does need to be expanded somehow now that there's a viable number of artists of color that are making music under that term. Uh, I just, yeah, it's kind of amorphous, but there's nothing has really come around that can replace it as a working term. So
Right.
I guess it's good that it has a Grammy category. Um, it's good that it has an independent awards system so that people who might otherwise not get recognized are. But I'm more curious what you think of the term.
Oh, I mean, I very much agree with you that, like, I think it is, I think there are real benefits, or there are real positives to the idea of Americana creating this kind of alternate or complementary or oppositional kind of infrastructure. I like that a lot of artists can kind of be in that group, at least to kind of get noticed or get put on playlists or whatever. I think you know, it has been a space for a lot of my favorite music, even though that music is often stylistically very different. Kind of what, like you were saying, what gets placed in Americana is really wide ranging, and I think that's okay, but it is sort of interesting. I think that it's, I mean, my view has gotten a little brighter in the last couple of years, because I think that thanks to, particularly to artists of color, and most of whom are women, um, there has been a real insistence on kind of getting past, I think, a sort of implicit or explicit white nostalgia that can go along with Americana, that I don't think reflects the music, and I don't think reflects actually what Americana can be. But I do think it, I don't know, it is interesting to think about with a value of something that can kind of include so many different kinds of music and so many different musicians, at sometimes I think at the expense of kind of, you know, differentiating between them. But I don't know. It's interesting. But I do think that the work that's being done, that's most interesting to me in Americana or whatever, in terms of the music, is that which is trying to expand what we think Americana is. I think that's what's the most interesting to me, and I think is again the product of particularly artists of color, and particularly women, who have been working to do that and have done a lot musically and otherwise. But I don't know. I mean, it's better than alt country. I'm kind of glad we're not, like, it's
I'd
way better.
forgotten about that one.
Yeah. I mean, like, and I understood that move to do that, but an alt country was a little bit more, maybe, a particular kind of sound. But I'm definitely glad we dropped alt country. That was, because alt anything, I don't, at this point I'm just like, I don't know about this alt hyphen business for anything.
Yeah.
So,
Well, Americana works for some artists of color. But then there's others, like in this summit's lineup, Sweet Honey in the Rock,
absolutely.
they come from a deeper well than what most Americana people draw from. And I'm really happy to be in this lineup with them because their founder, Bernice Johnson Reagon, is my father's cousin.
Mm,
I grew up getting to see them live in my neighborhood and around the city. And besides from Crosby, Stills and Nash and Allman Brothers Band and Gil
mm,
Scott Heron, they had a lot to do with shaping my early sense of sound.
absolutely. And an Americana world that, you know, incorporates, that includes Sweet Honey, like, not that everything needs to be Americana, but I certainly don't want to live in a world in which Sweet Honey in the Rock is not understood as a massively, not just important, but the work that, yeah, absolutely. And I too am incredibly honored to be on a line with Sweet Honey in the Rock. Never thought that would happen in my career. Um,
Well, the last thing I'd say is that my song Americana is about a revered artist under that umbrella, but they shall remain nameless.
yeah,
Now,
all right. Well, now y'all are gonna have to go listen to the song. Try to
Yeah, go
figure
listen
out.
and try to divine who it's
Absolutely.
about.
So just a couple more questions. It sort of seems obligatory in a sense. It's 2024, and everybody's talking about Beyonce and country, and we don't need to talk about Beyonce and country. But it does seem like once again, there is this conversation that has emerged, right, around this kind of moment for Black country, right? Or at least another time when people who maybe weren't aware of the fact that Black country has always been a thing and continues to be in so many great ways. But it does seem like a moment where this conversation about Black country artists, but also Black and brown and indigenous country art, there seems to be a moment of larger conversation and awareness, thanks to Beyonce, but also thanks to how folks are talking about this. Um, as someone who is making music that taps into these traditions, as someone who as an artist and writer, has been thinking about these things for so long, I'm just kind of wondering what you think. What do you think the possibilities are in this moment when a kind of broader spotlight is being cast, well, for the moment at least, on all this music and all these traditions? And then also, what are the risks of it? Like, what are the challenges of this Beyonce moment in terms of trying to make a space for a larger conversation or for more artists and others to be celebrated and it not just being about. I'm just kind of wondering, again, it is the moment, it is the zeitgeist that we are in, and I just kind of wonder, as someone who has been doing all of this great work for so long, like, what do you think of this right now, and where do you think this might be going for us?
Well, the Beyonce moment is irrelevant to me because she, of all pop artists, doesn't need more assistance to bring heat to her career. What is telling regarding Texas Hold'em is that even she needed her fan base to ring into radio to get her into rotation. But no other Black country or Americana artist, not even Rhiannon Giddens, who featured on her single, has a hive that they can bring to bear on country radio and mainstream Nashville on their behalf. I don't believe that her current success benefits anybody else. It's wishful thinking, but artists on their own are making the current attention matter. There's organizations like the Black Opry, which you probably know more about than I do, that are doing hard work to make a space for all these emerging artists of color that have been overlooked, and need to support them to get more attention and ears on their music. It would be nice to think that her success could mean that people are looking at other artists. And I'm sure there's a little bit of that going on, but I still think there's a distinct public for Beyonce compared to other artists, Black artists that are working in country and Americana.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I thought too that it was very telling, and I think in a good way, but it was very telling that I know for a lot of us, when this all started happening, when Beyonce dropped the news and dropped the single and everything, I think a lot of our reaction was to kind of immediately start talking about all these other artists and all these other songwriters and all these other musicians who do not have do not have the infrastructure or the resources that Beyonce does, as a means of trying to, in whatever little way we could, to try to insist on that. But I completely agree. So speaking of artists, right? And as someone who is always, I know, listening and thinking, and has hipped me to so much great music over the years, and like I don't know that I ever would have listened to Manassas, the album Manassas, if it wasn't for you.
Oh, really?
But I'm so glad I did.
Great.
That's another one I remember you talking about, and then you wrote about too. But just what are some artists, either past or present, that you think we should be listening to? Who are some people who we should pay more attention to, or people who are kind of resonating with you, either again from old, new, whatever? Just who are some artists that you think we should pay more attention to?
Well, the indigenous artist Karen Dalton also influenced me. She deserves to be wider known. I know she's a cult figure, but she deserves to be wider known. There's also Peter Lafarge, who's worth remembering. I have most been interested in the newest albums of Logan, Ledger, and Black Pumas. In recent months, those have been exciting to me. I don't get a lot of time to listen like before, but when I do, those are the ones I pull out. Then of younger artists, there's Kaya Cater from Canada, who's a younger artist of color that greatly impresses me. And she also has a black string band called New Dangerfield that I'm really hoping to see live somehow soon. And of younger indigenous artists, there is the two-spirit Canadian artist Jeremy Dutcher, who I hope to finally see this coming Wednesday at Lincoln Center in New York. He's performing. I think it's going to be hard to get into, but we'll see and try hard. Those are the people that most readily come to mind. I'm sure if I had more time to ponder, I'd dig up some other artists, but I mostly listen to old music. I have to be honest. I don't listen to contemporary, what's on the pop charts and what's in radio. It's like the time I find out about this stuff is when it's the CMT Awards or the Grammys or something. And I see what's been going on in the rest of the world that I was ignoring.
Right. Yeah. Those are some great recommendations. I mean, the Jeremy Dutcher album from last year just knocked me sideways, and so yeah, no, that's such a powerful artist, and all of them you mentioned is really fantastic. Well, just to close, I mean, I always like to give people an opportunity to hype themselves. What are some ways that we can support your work, or things that you've got coming up that you wanna let us know to again either support or just follow or whatever? Just what's coming up that we can do, or that we can be a part of to help support all of the amazing things that you've got going on?
Well, I don't have a complete social media, but it would be helpful if people followed me on Instagram, which is at Cactus Rose Loves You. Not tomorrow, Sunday, after the Thunderbird American Indian Spring Powwow, which Lonnie and I are attending, we'll be performing at Penny Joe's in Manhattan, Upper Manhattan, at 7 p.m. And it's going to be a lineup for this new quarterly queer country series. As allies, we're joining in the fun.
Right.
And it's called the Rainbow Rodeo. The other bands are the Locksmith Band, Jackfruit, and Brian Falduccio. And I'm interested in getting to meet all of them. Besides from some more local shows, like we'll be playing Big City Folk on April 11th, which is also in Hamilton Heights, I believe. We'll be headlining the Oberlin Folk Festival on May 3rd in Ohio.
Excellent. Yeah, definitely follow at Cactus Rose Loves You for all the good info. And again, you know, I'm again not sure with this audience. I hope at least that people are already familiar with your earlier work, but if you are not, both in terms of writing and the previous music that Candia Crazy Horse has released, just really, really fantastic and important stuff that deserves the widest audience possible. We got to get that house in Laurel Canyon for you. So we're gonna do everything we can here.
Well, you could come visit in Laurel Canyon, so maybe that'll give you some incentive to help us
there it
out.
is. There it is. Exactly. I can't think of a better West Coast home for the crew.
It'll be full of sound, you know that.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
a lot of books, too many books. I mean, my sister and I sold a bunch of our books a few years back, but I've acquired many new ones that I have to read, like the Sly Stone memoir.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. I've not read that one yet either, but I hear it's something else, which is what you'd expect. So yeah.
It's his birthday today, so
Oh, happy birthday. It's also Al Bell's birthday from Stax.
oh wow,
And this is a
great day.
yeah, really. Well, it is a great day in part because I'm so happy that I got to talk with my friend and my brilliant colleague. Um, Thank you to everybody here at the summit. What an amazing weekend. Thank you to Kamara, Thomas. Thank you to Kim Register. Thank you to everybody involved with this. And we'll see you again next year in one form or another. But even though we're all spread out all over the place, I hope that we all in our little Zoom rooms, please join me in thanking Candy Crazy Horse for being here and for all of the great work that you continue to do. This has been such a thrill, so thank you.
Thank you to Kamara for having me. And yes, dear friend, it's great to see you through the
Thanks,
virtual
Cynthia.
lens.
It's so good to see you too. You look fantastic. I love what a fantastic conversation and so many insights. As always, it's like, one conversation introduces, a myriad of rabbit holes to now go down. I was like jotting down. I was like jotting down all the artists that you talked about. I'm like, oh, there's always something that that I've never heard of that Candia is going to tell me about. And that's always a great rabbit hole to go down. So this has been so great. Thanks so much for really spearheading our annual summit this year, yeah, it's just been great to finally like dig in with Candia. And it's basically like it's like we need to just call it the Charles Hughes interview.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I am. Hey,
like 60 minutes or something.
I'm happy. I'm happy to be like the Dick Cavett of the
Yeah,
of the
Dick
summit.
Cavett.
Yeah.
Oh man, but no,
Well, thank
what
you
no,
so
what's
much.
it's always a highlight of my year. So for real.
Well, it's yeah, just you're never getting off the hook for any summit, Charles. So just
I will not try. I'm happy to remain on the hook.
Awesome. Well, it's been great. It's just been great being with you all and being privy to this conversation. I'm sure that everyone is enjoying it. And yeah, you'll see Candia's information probably scroll across your screen at some point during the broadcast. So thank you so much, you guys. Oh, I have a child.
Thank you.
And
Hello
Thank
to
you
the
all.
children.
this is my child, Isis. Isis coming to the summit. You can't tap me on the shoulder if you're not going to be seen on the summit.
Isis, you're so big. The last time I saw you, you were a little babe in arms. Wonderful to see you.
Nine. 9 already.
No,
Anyway,
I'm young.
we'll go down a kid rabbit hole if we keep going. Thanks so much, you guys, and see you on the avenue soon in real life.
Yes.
Thank you.